Silent wounds. The hospital was quiet that night. The kind of quiet that made you feel like you could hear your own thoughts. Nurses moved swiftly, with practiced ease, through the sterile hallways, their steps echoing against the white tiles. In the labor ward, the clock ticked steadily, as if time had slowed itself just to match the laboring women inside. And then, the door opened. A woman stumbled in, breath ragged, her face pale and contorted in pain. She was dressed in a tattered dress, her body covered in dirt, blood, and bruises. The nurse at the front desk looked up, eyes widening slightly at the sight of the woman. The woman's eyes were hollow, but there was a fire within them, fear, desperation, and something else. The nurse rushed to her. "Are you all right? What happened?" she asked, her voice urgent yet calm. The woman staggered slightly but held herself upright, clutching her belly as if it were the only thing tethering her to the ground. She shook her head, her lips trembling. "I need help. It's time," she whispered hoarsely. The nurse quickly assessed the situation. The woman was clearly in labor, her breath shallow and quick. But there was something else, something in the way she held herself. The bruises on her arms and the way she moved so cautiously, that made the nurse's instincts flare. "All right," the nurse said gently, guiding the woman toward the delivery room. "Let's get you into a bed. We'll take care of everything." But as they moved, the nurse noticed something more. Her hands brushed against the woman's skin, and she felt the rawness of the injuries. The bruises weren't just from the roughness of travel. They were fresh, deep, and angry. There were cuts, burns, and even some signs of broken bones beneath the tattered clothing. "What happened to you?" the nurse asked again, though she was almost afraid to hear the answer. The woman closed her eyes, biting her lip as she attempted to hide the pain in her voice. "It doesn't matter. Just, please, the baby." The nurse looked at the woman's face, studying her closely. The terror in her eyes told her that the woman hadn't come here just to give birth. She had come for help, for escape. There was a story here, and it was a story the nurse knew she had to hear. But it would have to wait. For now, the baby was the priority. The delivery room was sterile, a stark contrast to the chaos that seemed to surround the woman who had just walked in. The nurse, whose name was Clara, hurried to prepare the space. She motioned to the other staff, who quickly began setting up for the birth. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right with this patient. The woman, who was now lying on the bed, seemed to be fighting with every breath. Her face was slick with sweat, her eyes wide and unblinking as if she were seeing something beyond the walls of the room. Clara gently placed a hand on the woman's shoulder, trying to bring her attention back to the present. "Breathe. Focus on me," Clara urged softly. But the woman was lost, her gaze distant. She mumbled, almost in a trance. "He's coming. He's coming for me. He'll find me. He always finds me." Clara's heart skipped a beat. There was something strange in the way the woman spoke. The terror in her voice was palpable. But it wasn't just fear of childbirth. It was something deeper, something far darker. The room filled with the soft sounds of medical equipment beeping. But Clara's mind was elsewhere. She glanced back at the woman, noticing that her pulse was erratic. The veins in her neck were bulging, as if she were under some kind of immense pressure. Clara moved to the woman's side, her hands shaking slightly as she checked the woman's vitals. Woman's vitals. Stay with me, Clara whispered, trying to keep the situation under control. We're here to help you. The woman's eyes snapped open then, locking onto Clara's with a sudden intensity. Her pupils were dilated, and there was an almost unnatural gleam in her eyes. It's him, she hissed. He's here. He's always here. Clara's breath caught in her throat as a chill ran down her spine. Something was terribly wrong. As she moved to adjust the woman's position, she saw it. Her skin was crawling, literally. Tiny, black veins had begun to surface on the woman's body, creeping up her arms and neck. It looked as if something was slithering just beneath her skin, making its presence known. Clara recoiled, but the woman's grip tightened on her wrist, the pressure so intense that Clara winced in pain. You have to stop him, the woman screamed. You have to stop him before he takes her. Clara blinked, momentarily lost for words. What do you mean? Who is he? She asked, her voice trembling now. The woman opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, there was a loud crash from the hallway. The lights flickered for a moment, casting eerie shadows along the walls of the room. Clara froze, her eyes darting toward the door. Did you hear that? She whispered, her heart pounding in her chest. The woman's breathing quickened. She seemed to be in even more pain now, her eyes darting around the room in a panic. He's coming. He's coming for her. And for you, too. Clara's mind raced. She had heard rumors, whispered in hushed voices among the staff. Tales of a patient, no, a force, who had haunted the hospital for years, always leaving destruction in its wake. But she hadn't believed it. Not until now, before she could respond. The door to the room burst open. Clara's heart jumped into her throat. But it wasn't the kind of man she had been expecting. Standing in the doorway was a figure, tall, shadowed, and impossibly still. Its eyes were the darkest black Clara had ever seen, and they seemed to suck the light from the room as if it were made of darkness itself. The woman on the bed gasped, her breath hitching in terror. No. Not him. Please. Don't let him near her. Clara stepped backward, her breath shallow, as the figure slowly moved into the room. It was unnervingly silent, its every step measured and deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey. The air grew cold, as if the temperature had dropped several degrees in an instant. The figure's gaze shifted toward the woman on the bed, its eyes narrowing with a malicious gleam. Clara's pulse raced. She had no idea who or what this thing was. But she knew one thing for sure. It was not human. The woman, trembling in terror, suddenly screamed. A sharp, high-pitched sound that pierced the air and seemed to rattle the very walls of the room. Clara covered her ears, the sound making her stomach churn. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the scream stopped. The woman's body fell limp, her eyes wide open in shock. Clara rushed to her side, feeling for a pulse. But there was nothing. The woman was gone. The figure didn't move, but Clara could feel its gaze on her, like icy fingers brushing against her skin. She knew she had to act fast. She had to get out of the room. But just as she turned to flee, the figure spoke in a voice that sounded like 1,000 whispers, all blending together in a sinister harmony. Too late, it said, its voice smooth and chilling. The curse has already been set in motion. Clara's heart stopped. What curse? What had this woman done? And why was she, Clara, now a part of this nightmare? as if to answer her question. The figure stepped closer, and the lights in the room flickered again. The room seemed to tilt, the walls warping and stretching as if the very fabric of reality was bending. Clara reached for the door, but before she could touch it, the figure moved in front of her, blocking her escape. "Don't worry," it whispered. "You'll understand soon. You're just like her." Clara didn't understand. The words didn't make sense. But there was something in the air, a palpable tension, a sense of impending doom that told her she didn't have much time. The figure raised its hand, and as it did, Clara felt her body grow heavy, her limbs slow. She was paralyzed, unable to move or even scream. "Sleep," it commanded. And, with that single word, Clara's vision blurred. The last thing she saw before everything went black was the figure's eyes, gleaming with a cold, malicious satisfaction.